Okay, so in this part 5, I'm basically going to show what bugs I fixed when I was basically creating this version 1.5, which basically started from here, and then I gave this the content and the structure to Claude, and I basically gave it a bunch of screenshots that have all sorts of issues, and then Claude fundamentally mapped it out and then created all these files, right? And there's another video that goes into details, but fundamentally Claude said, I'm going to build this, and that is fundamentally this part here, right? Which worked really nicely, except the fact that nothing actually was working here, right? So what I'm going to work through now is the workflow that goes from here all the way to, and you can see here on Git, I have all the little changes all the way to this part here, right? 1.5, and this makes it look like that, and everything was working, right? So let's go back in time. Let's go back to the first pass at creating version 1.5 from the brief, which is that. So what's really powerful is I was then able to go to Claude and say, hey, this is cool. So I deploy these files, and you can say, you know, from here, that's what I got. There's a screenshot, right? And then I says, okay, from deployed, can you make the width bigger? And there's something wrong with events, right? Can you fix this? And by the way, while you add a label, and then we lost the debug function is very important. And on load, can you trigger this thing here, right? So he goes, Claude does this, you know, makes a bunch of changes, and then he gives me the code, and he goes, says, yeah, I fixed it, bugs fixed, yada, yada, they're all nice and good, right? And basically, it should look like this, right? So there's the files that I got in here, and these files are now the files that go into this next version, which is this, right? So this is now the next version, which is, again, improve UI, added debug panel to fix the event. So now the UI looks like this. So this is the next version of it, right? So you can see, yeah, debug panel, yeah, this version here, which is really cool, fix the width. So it's actually quite a lot of good stuff. But none of these actually work, right? And now here's an interesting thing, right? This is where sometimes, you know, there's a difference between if you're just doing vibe coding and you're depending on the LLMs to figure out everything, you can go on crazy rabbit holes. But because I know the code, I understand the code, I can read the code, in a way I'm still maintaining it, right? Although I'm actually copying and pasting more than normally I would, right? But I still keep an eye on it and I still make some changes. I actually look at the code and say, look, actually, here's the problem, right? The reason don't fire is because actually the constructor is never executed, and that's the problem, right? And the reason is this the event, you know, this guy never fires because he would fire, you know, because the DOM is already loaded, right? But here's the other thing that was interesting is when you keep an eye on the code, you also make sure the code quality is very high. And I said, look, problematic is that the playground controller is a vanilla JavaScript and not an HTML element, right? And actually we can see it here, because if I go to the code and I go into the code of this version, you can see that it's actually a class. It doesn't extend. So for me, this is a problem, right? And this is where even when I give crazy guidance, even when there's a lot of examples, even when, you know, the IFD guidance, right, actually says, don't do it like this. It still does this kind of stuff, right? So that's why I have to keep an eye on it, right? But then it goes, he actually picks it up. This is now Claude responding, yes, you're right. The don't load modifier is too easy. It's not IFD compliant. It should be a web component. And again, yes, correct. If I load the principles, yeah, right? And then the solution, let's convert it, right? So then he looks at this, converts it, replaces it. Again, he does these steps, and then gives me the files, right? So he fixes that, and now, so now he got this information. This is actually like a little interesting bug. You could see here, like, you know, this is a bug in Claude, because look, he broke the thing, right? So this bit actually should be now outside. So it's kind of like, you know, a little bug in Claude. But again, you know, IFD, look, he gives a little award for it. And now emap, yes, is a web component. So let's take a look at it, right? So I can now look at the next code change that was did, it basically is this, and I can see it changed playground controller to be an HTML element. So now if I look at the code, there it is, right? Now it's correct. This is the new version, right? Playground controller extends web element, so now that's nicer, right? It's actually a much better way of doing it. And then we can look in UI, see what it looks like, right? So it kind of looks the same, and sometimes that's the power, right? The power of refactoring. It kind of looks the same, but and you can see it loads up okay. And now this guy works well, right? So you can actually see that we fixed this problem. I can also check it here. That's also nice. The problem is this guy here, right? So you can see there's a bug here, right? HTML dick, it's actually bad. So we go into the next version. So then I go, okay, this is that version. So now I get to give it these things. So look, this was great, and then I can select all nice and good. So this is me saying, if you look at it, it says, look, I'm reviewing auto execution. Pick 1 shows what happens with the UI. Pick 2 and 3 shows that we can now select the sample file. But 3 it shows that is also okay. Okay, the problem is on that parse button, which is basically this other thing I give it here. So I basically say, look, that is fine. Here is the bug, right? So the bug is here, and I also show that the error is there, right? So you could see. So now I give it detailed information on pick 6. You can see that this information, and also actually on pick 6, I've also say, which is important, right? There's no network traffic, right? So you can see the bug doesn't even reach there, right? So then again, so now it does excellent debugging. So again, I'm helping Claude to do this stuff, right? I'm giving lots of very good clues. And then it looks at the code, it picks it up, that means it's correct, it's undefined, and then he finds it correctly, finds the bug, and then he corrects it. And it's quite cool, right? So he looks for the endpoints, looking for that, finds the bug, and then here it is, and he returns a JavaScript object, so then finding the thing, so then he goes to stuff and gives me the next version of it, right? So, and then he actually looks for the updated code, so now we are here, and then the next version is basically this one here, so he first trying to parse the bug. So I go there, right? So now let's take a look at this. So this is the next version there, and there's still a problem here, right? So you could see that we still have a bug there, right? It still didn't work. So I go, actually, pick 2 is dead, doesn't work. Pick 2 in a call works. So then it goes exactly. In fact, here's the interesting thing. So I actually say, look, this is in version 1.5, the parser doesn't work, but peak 2 is the same call in version 1.4 works. And remember, because I can go back in time with my versions, it's very easy because they fully working, because every version 1.5 is fundamentally built on top of 1.4, and I never touched it, right? So the beauty of it is that I can show, okay, 1.4 is good, why don't I take a look at it? So basically what he looks at it, he looks at that, and then he goes here, and he goes, oh, look, I got the base URL wrong, right? And in fact, I could tell that already, right? Because if you look here, you could see that the base URL is wrong, right? I almost wanted to see, hey, can you spot the difference, right? And it did, right? So he found that, yes, the problem is here. You should call this guy. You shouldn't call that one. See? So the problem is that there is a 404 there. So then, so look, see, that's the bug. You should call this. So you shouldn't have HTML service. So then he removes this. And actually, this is a really cool thing, because actually the fix here, if I remember correctly, right? So he does the fix. He gives me the fix. But the fix, and by the way, look, he gives me the whole file. Here's the new file, right? Fixing, layout, etc. But if we look at the fix of this version, it's literally one line. Like, look at that. So all of that, and that's the fix. In fact, the fix is actually changing from that, right, to just this bit here. So because you don't need that base URL. See that line there? So it was really clever. Like, you did the whole thing and then realized that's the minimal change. And that's literally the difference between, in a way, one version and the other version. And that's why it's important to go list bit by bit, right? So now here, if I go, you could see now it's working. So now this bit works. So now when I change here, if you look here at title, right, and I go, I say AAA, if I now go parse, you get to see that, there you go, there's my AAA in the data, and there's my AAA here, right? That guy didn't work, that's a bug, right? So now I can say, I can go, great, that fixed, right? And I said, that is great, but now look at this, right? So that fixed the problem. Now we got this error. And I literally say, look at here, can you see the bug, right? And you can actually, if you look at the what's interesting about this, is we can actually look at the network traffic, right? What we can actually see is of the network traffic, it fails here. So we can actually say, this is what I sent to the server. This is my response. Look, see, it's an error, validation error, right? It should be a string. And the problem is actually is architecture. So if you look at this, you actually have HTML dig and HTML dig together, right? So that's actually two. So look at that, right? So the object that's been sent to the server is actually badly designed, right? On the client side. So then you look, double mapping. He actually picked it up really nicely. So then he does this, he goes down, it bugs. So then it tries to do the fix, etc. Again, he's always go like, yay, he did it. It didn't, but it's quite cool. And also, it does go to town on builds all these extra pages, payload fix, change log. If there's a lot of token here that I didn't kind of need it, all this stuff, right? So again, so I got this information. So let's look at it, right? So this was this fix for the hashes, which didn't work, right? So there's that fix that it tried to build the stuff. So then I go, okay, you know, you do the thing, it still fails. And by the way, look, you can check this out. So this is quite cool because this guy does the stuff automatically, and then I add the thing where I can click the buttons, or I can actually run the full flow automatically, which is great for debugging, right? So as soon as this loads, this guy runs, and it basically triggers the whole thing, right? So it's almost as a test for me, right? So I then go, but the payload, there's something wrong with it, right? And here's what, again, I then help it to debug it. So I then do is I say, look, let me show you actually what should happen. So I then go into the HTML, like the basically the Swagger page, right? And I say, look, when I call this guy with the HTML, right, I'm going to get this information, right? So what's cool about it is that I can give it this URL and I can give it this. And I says, look, from there you got that. Actually, you got this nice method here, which actually will give you both. So why don't you take a look at this? So then I say, look, see, if I say this URL, I actually get back the HTML dict and the mappings. And actually this one here is actually compatible. Took me a while to do, you know, it was like by design compatible with the other one, which is hashes to HTML. So again, if I come in here, you get to see that I get my HTML back, right? In fact, what you could see here is there's the hash that gets replaced. So you could see that this is my HTML with my placeholders, and this is the content that is going in here, right? So this guy is the hash of that one, and then of course the HTML is rebuilt like that, right? But so the cool thing is I can actually give it to the LLM that. So let's say, look, this URL produces this output, this URL produces that. So can you see what's wrong, right? And actually, it's funny because it actually spotted two things that, you know, actually I forgot to mention, but I should say, actually the original one is spotting two endpoints. Because he's calling that and that, but I'm actually, so the original one that Claude was using used two endpoints. It basically would call the HTML to dict and HTML to text nodes, right? To actually HTML to HTML hashes. No, I think, is it this one? I think is the text nodes, right? To give you the information, right? But then you realize that, oh, you're actually using this to dict hashes and hash to HTML. Yeah, so look, here it is. It calls HTML dict and HTML to text nodes, right? So, and to be honest, he could have fixed it with this, but in a way, Claude actually was clever here to realize, why don't I just use this, right? Why don't you, look, and then the URL returns this, EX correctly picked out the bug, here's the bug, right? But then they go, I should be calling that, right? And then what's interesting, and this is quite funny because I actually did the fix when I wrote the original brief. So when I sent the brief to Claude, that method actually didn't exist because I realized that after I created the HTML thing. So one of the versions of the HTML service that I updated had this. So it actually says, oh, hold on, that version didn't exist in the version I had before, but hey, you show it working, so it means it's actually out of date. So let me actually use that, right? Very clever, right? So then it does the stuff, it does the changes, puts the bug, does this bit, and then here we go, right? So you got the round trip. So let's look at the solution here. So then look, they go better use to the endpoint, and then it goes the bit there, fix the request. So now if you look at the playground, this is the latest version, we almost there, right? So actually what's happening is this gets parsed, that gets parsed. You could see that he actually called correctly let's just, if we just do this, he calls correctly the hashes. That is correct to get that data back, right? So now he only calls that to dict to hashes, so that's correct. And then the HTML call, which is basically the hashes to HTML, is also correctly done. So you actually see that we actually got the correct answer here, right? But it didn't display correctly, right? There's a bug. And actually, this is a bug I've seen before, so that's why I say here, look, see, that worked, right? And I said, this part is working. And I actually said, look, see here? So you can look at this. It says, look, the call to the thing is working. You can see on pick 2. The problem is here, as you see before, the code is trying to parse the response. But actually, we had this bug before. We had this bug on version 1.2, which is basically what it means. It means that it's trying to parse the response back as HTML, as JSON instead of HTML. So there you go. It turns plain HTML, not thingy. So we need to code it back. So here's the bug correctly, right? So the bug is here because we're trying to convert the response we get into JSON on the browser, which is actually not correct, right? So he fixes to this. So then he goes, yay, there's a nice piece of the puzzle. Here we go, right? And then there's gives me the text. So then again, let's try that out. So then final bug, there we go. And then here's the actual changes that were made in this final little version. So you could see here, there's the little change, right, in the controller, right? There's the bit that was doing the conversion. So this is the change that was made before and after, right, in order to handle the text base. And now if we go here, we got the whole system working. There you go, right? So now it works really nicely, rebuild. So if I change this guy to AAA and then the paragraph to BBB, you could see that now I got AAA there, BBB there. The text, again, has just the hashes, and then it gets converted. If I rebuild here, you got my AAA, BBB. Everything's fine, and we get no network errors, and we get no console errors, right? So it's really cool, right? And again, you can see when I refresh this, it triggers the whole process automatically. For me, no errors on console, off we go, right? All nice and good. And then the last thing I do, I say, this is all good. So then what I do is I say, look, see attached all the code. So these are all the files that we actually change on this bit, which is quite cool, right? So you can see that all this only modified out of all the files that you get loaded here. So if you think about it, like out of every single file that gets loaded here, right? And it's quite a lot. It's 14 files in this case, right? So you could see that of all these files that get loaded here, and you can see it's already a mix from 1.1 to 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. I only have these files here on 1.5. So I'm reusing stuff that I created before. The top nav is there, some common endpoints. So that is really powerful, right? Because in a way, I'm literally leveraging, right, literally that IFD development node. So what I do is I give it the files that I had. I actually give it a README file from the previous version, because again, I don't want it to go to town and say, can you give me the README file for 1.5, right? And then he goes, he creates the thing, maps it out, blah, 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 and then he gives me the README file here, right? So there is somewhere here, there's the README file that he created. And then creating file, final versions. There we go. There's a README file that it was created that explains integration. This is actually a really good document, right? This is basically everything that changed in this version, and even have a nice mapping. So you can see version 0.1 is dashboard, transformation, ES models, thing is syntax highlighting current web component architecture by complete API integration fix. Spot on. And that fundamentally is the last version that I put here. So you could see here, final bug with refactoring. Actually, I at this stage I committed, and I can see past my test because it goes there. And then this is the final version that actually has a README included. That's why I updated there, right? You can see here, right? On the README, and you can see that this bit here is fundamentally when I push to my dev, to my CI pipeline, and I know that every time it hits one of these, it actually hits my dev deployment. So this will deploy automatically to GitHub, which is really cool. So that's why once I put it here, and that's why you can see I've already committed 1.6, but it's not, I haven't pushed it yet. So this is, see, 0.617 is the version that is now here. Look, 6.017. So this is the version that I push into my Lambda function that, on the CI pipeline. So it's really powerful. But again, look at how attention to detail I had to have, and look at the power of, if you know a bit of coding, you can help a lot. Claude, but also I spent a lot of time to make sure that the blast radius of the change is very limited. And in a way, I'm helping Claude to actually create cleaner and cleaner code by allowing it to make very small changes in a code base. And then you end up with this, which is really cool. As we're going to improve it a lot, but it's already starting to look good.